planet Ibos. The year 2022. Ibos is not a normal planet. For the last several 100,000 years, it has been the home of the Parm Dooms, a race of tripedal beings not too dissimilar from us. They have consciousness, free will, and form societies. Like us, they've developed into a flourishing technological age. Scientific advancement is explosive, and society has become complex in a way never seen before. The Parm Dooms have gained the ability to perceive and start to understand the nature of the universe they live in. However, just like humanity, the Parm Dooms have seen no others living with them in the cosmos. The Parm Dooms are alone. Until one day. The sun rises on the eastern continent of Gabon, home to the largest farms and wilderness areas on the planet. A team of astronomers here has been up all night, contemplating a most mysterious discovery. A signal has been detected, a short barrage of information. At first indecipherable, but now coming into clearer focus. To the human race, the sun of Ibos is known as Teegarden's star, the target of the Rubisco broadcast from the Arecibo Observatory 12 years prior. The content of the message, a DNA sequence from Earth, does not matter. The Parm Dooms do not yet have the ability to read it. What matters is the effect of the discovery itself. Like on Earth, the complexities of society in a new technological age had perched Ibos on the edge of a great deal of built-up tension. Within a day of the discovery on Ibos going public, over half the planet falls into a panicked chaos. In this series so far, we've discussed a lot of the possibilities for interacting with extraterrestrial intelligence. However, surrounding all these possibilities for detecting and reaching out lines of communication to extraterrestrial civilizations come with a wide array of hypothetical scenarios. Now, obviously, some imaginable situations are much more likely than others, but all of them are worthy of some consideration when dealing with a topic so mysterious, especially the ones which may spell disaster.
Nowhere to be found.
Search for signals from civilizations in space, and just one, to broadcast a message to a distant star cluster called
Nowhere to be found.
But is there anyone out there to talk to?
Come on, Andre.
What kinds of scenarios might unfold from inter-civilization contact is a form of wild speculation, which we will touch on again later. But first, I think it's important that we once again reanalyze the notion of sending intentional messages to other worlds, this time through the lens of research ethics.
When we transmit messages to other civilizations, a practice generally referred to as messaging extraterrestrial intelligence, or METI, we do so without knowing what will happen as a result. We have plenty of theories about the possible outcomes of this action, but no definitive knowledge whatsoever. By definition, then, this makes the act of METI experimental in nature, and there lies the root of our ethical crux.
In ethical research, when the subjects of a proposed experiment are human beings, the experiment is required to be the subject of an ethics review by an institutional review board. This is to determine if the experiment falls within certain ethical parameters, which are as follows. 1. The experiment needs to have a reasonable chance at garnering the information being sought. 2. The research needs to absolutely require the subjects to be human beings. 3. The benefits of the knowledge gained by the experiment should be expected to outweigh the risks of conducting the experiment, especially for the test subjects. 4. Last and most important of all, the researchers need to have the consent of the subjects being experimented on.
Professor of Anthropology and Religious Studies John W. Trophagen argues that METI efforts are indeed experimental in nature, and that the alien beings we are hypothetically communicating with are sentient subjects, and therefore ought to be considered human for the purposes of ethical analysis. Now, we really can't tell if aliens would be human in the sense that we would recognize, or if they'd even come close to being that way. There really isn't any way at a distance to measure if a species possesses individuality, free will, or consciousness. However, if they're able to intercept our transmissions, then it implies a certain level of sentience, or at least intelligence, and that quality alone must be given a great deal of respect. When lacking so much information about the beings we want to communicate with, it is morally safest to assume they have full rights to ethical treatment, just like humans do. What we decide on this issue, whether or not we treat extraterrestrial beings as people or not, is a very important point of fact. There is a long and unfortunate precedent among human cultures to label other people who live on the fringe of the known world as being something otherworldly, and thereby not deserving of the same basic decent treatment. This choice is between seeing our cosmic cousins as equal entities with us in the universe, or as quasi-people who we can do with as we wish. How we act on this matter may determine our long-term reputation in a widely populated galaxy, so it's very important that we choose right the first time. When viewing METI as an experiment involving human beings as subjects, it seems that ethical research requirements should indeed apply. However, when viewing METI through this lens, the entire quest for contact gets called into question.
Let's take METI and check it with the institutional review guidelines we looked at before. First, the knowledge being sought, that is, to know if there are aliens or not, can arguably be considered knowledge unlikely to be gained. While it is certainly possible for us to find evidence of extraterrestrial civilization, as we have discussed at length in previous episodes, there is absolutely no guarantee of this success, and there are a lot of reasons why someone could believe no such success will ever come. So unfortunately, we can't clearly state that active METI will yield the information we are seeking. Second, there are plenty of reasons why active METI is not actually necessary to discover evidence of an alien civilization. Passive SETI efforts are, for what they're worth, just as likely to dredge up results, and therefore putting ourselves in the ethically risky territory of experimenting on possibly very real extraterrestrial people might not prove worth it. Third, there is the need for there to be a balance between the risks and rewards of the experiment, but the cost-benefit results of first contact are entirely up to the circumstances of the particular situation, therefore impossible to predict. Fourth, the most important and obvious, is the question of consent. Unfortunately, this is the worst ethical crux of the whole notion. There is literally no way to gain the consent of an uncontacted alien race prior to first contact with them. Throwing all this together, active METI is not looking very ethical, according to the traditional guidelines. While these ethical questions are interesting and certainly challenging to the eager mind, one might find it hard to look at the search for life in the universe as being a scientific experiment in the classical sense. While yes, active METI is probing the cosmos in hopes of exposing information, it does not necessarily have to constitute an experiment in the usual sense of the word. Even though the results of actually collecting data on this matter would be world-shattering, potentially for both us and the aliens in question, the act of shouting in the forest could be considered a natural action, which any civilization is liable to take at any time. So then, why should we be any different? Additionally, the idea of trying to thwart people's or institutions' efforts to establish first contact is a somewhat silly Orwellian idea, destined to fail. The spans of time and the multitude of opinions on this matter guarantee that there is unlikely to be any one consensus for long. Additionally, if we did succeed in suppressing our desire to send messages to other stars, then we would essentially become a silent world. And there'd be no reason to think that other beings didn't follow the same line of logic to the same end, resulting in a silent universe. Research ethics, then, ironically, finds itself as a potential Fermi paradox solution. Some proponents of METI activities dispel the fears of ethically concerned researchers due to the possibility that intelligent beings on other worlds have already learned of our existence due to the passive radio and radar signal leakage our civilization has produced over the course of its technological age. Radios, TVs, aviation radar, and other human communications actively all result in some amount of signal leakage flying off into deep space, and that energy might be detectable by advanced aliens. Because of this, concern over revealing ourselves may be superseded by the fact that we already have revealed ourselves. This is known as the barn door argument, and it asserts that worry over the potential dangers of open communications efforts is pointless, because the horse has already bolted. Why worry about closing the barn door? While it is true that human society has been leaking radio transmissions into space for many decades, it's important to once again remember the lake analogy from our last episode. In this case, the signal leakage of Earth is analogous to the ripples on water we discussed, but even weaker. It's more like asking the birdwatchers on the other side of the lake to deduce your presence not from the ripples you've intentionally generated, but from the minute reverberations on the water caused by your footsteps on the dock. That's just so minute. Without highly advanced detection and computation equipment, the birdwatchers have no chance of detecting these fluctuations, if they are even present at all. The difference between this passive impact and intentionally firing a laser at the birdwatchers is massive. The difference between passive radio noise on Earth and an intentional METI signal is equally massive. If you assume that extraterrestrials have the same listening capabilities as us, Earth's passive radio noise cannot be heard. However, it's well within the range of imaginable possibilities that some aliens do, in fact, have the technology to detect our passive radio noise, even considering how faint it is. It's always technically possible to have a bigger antenna. However, this does not really dispel the concerns of Dr. Trophagen and other thinkers who are concerned with how we might affect an alien society. Interactions with higher beings opens up a long list of concerns we should have for ourselves.
If you assume that our radio leakage has been detected by another civilization, then you are faced with a perplexing logical qualm. If they know we're here, why haven't they made moves to contact us openly? Of course, it's possible that decades ago in another star system, somewhere in the 70 to 80-ish light-year bubble our leakage covers, a group of intelligent beings overheard a signal from Earth and formulated a message to us, which is still en route. It would take a message 70 years to cross 70 light-years, meaning that this hypothetical message would still be several decades away from us receiving it. So then, considering the scales involved in this issue, it is far too soon to make a strong judgment on the validity of the barn door argument. Truthfully, we could technically receive a message reading, "Hey, we heard you guys messing around. Be quieter, please," any day now. Assuming that doesn't happen though, we have to really wonder if trying to actively communicate with such silent aliens is worth the risk of our own increased detectability. If they've heard us already and chose not to respond, why would they respond to a later, louder message just because this time we meant to communicate? Perhaps our intent itself is what coaxes a response from them, but that will take us deeper into speculative territory and further from grounded scientific reasoning.
Andre!
What's up? You just look here. That's only a petrified tree. Only? Why, it's a bronze statue.
And much more, Hans. Rubies.
You say rubies? Show me.
Simple. The eye of an idol.
An idol?
Yes, a reptile. A reptile resembling that flying monster that attacked us earlier. Up there.
You're right, Andre. I'm not laughing anymore. There was a civilization here. And I'll bet you there still is.
The thing is, there really can't be any complete exploration of this topic without a fair dose of wild speculation. That's why, in many ways, the issue of first contact is something handled better by science fiction than by actual scientific study. But while random and wild speculation isn't really permitted in hard science, it is the basis for almost all forms of philosophy. When we seek to broadcast ourselves and our presence into the cosmos, it's possible that we are ignoring a fundamental clue in the universe. The silence of the stars themselves may provide us with enough reason to stay quiet. If the universe is teeming with life, but nobody broadcasts, is there a reason for that? Perhaps the reason is that everybody else knows something we don't about the universe. Of course, radio blasts, either intentional or not, are far from the only way for humanity to reveal itself. As we've discussed in previous episodes, there are many ways to detect civilizations at the interstellar scale. Many behaviors of technological society are noticeable, so there could be another version of the barn door argument applied not to passive radio broadcasts, but simply to the idea that our civilization is here, and another, more advanced civilization could plainly tell, just based on the way our planet looks. Some of these detection methods might reveal things which a civilization would not necessarily reveal about itself. War, for example, is not something for humanity to be proud of, but is also one of the more noticeable behaviors we do. We've talked before about how you can use spectroscopy to detect civilizations over interstellar distances from the pollutants left in planetary atmospheres. What if an alien civilization discovered us via the radiation left behind in our atmosphere from our use of nuclear weapons? Would they assume that we're a dangerous, volatile species and steer clear? Could this be why the people of the stars hide themselves from us?
This notion most notably relates to the idea of the Prime Directive, as it appears in Star Trek. In the world of the Federation, there is a policy against making contact with new cultures until they have achieved certain milestones, which indicate they are ready to be brought into the fold of galactic politics. In the case of the franchise, this milestone is warp drive. Perhaps there is a similar mechanic at play in the real-life universe, wherein we are intentionally kept from knowing the situation in the galaxy at large until we have met certain requirements. Or, more disturbingly, we'll be kept in this state forever, acting as a sort of zoo for the wider galactic population. This line of thinking is appropriately dubbed the zoo hypothesis, and is one of the more popular Fermi paradox solutions for philosophers to ponder. These philosophical notions certainly are interesting, and can of course be very useful as a way to find new directions for exploration. But of course they are all just that, notions. They all require massive assumptions to be made about reality, and for that reason can only be so useful in discussions of actual policy on making first contact attempts. We can speculate all we want on what aliens might be doing, but the only way to find useful conclusions is to focus on our own behavior in the face of these unknowns.
So it's plainly clear that Earth and humanity are possible to find without us having to actually intentionally reveal ourselves. But in almost all cases, this requires the alien civilization to be more advanced than us. While it's very important to the safety of Earth to consider and recognize these possibilities, the previous discussion of research ethics is concerned more with less advanced beings. Consider if our nearest neighbors were equal in technology to us. We would have no ability to detect their radio leakage, and they would have no ability to detect ours. So, the only way they could ever come to know about us is if we did something to indicate that to them.
It's impossible to truly tell the tale of what might happen to an extraterrestrial civilization if they picked up our signals as a first contact. However, as we've said before on this show, the genre of science fiction can often be one of the best ways to speculate about possibilities of the future. And so, to illustrate the concerns of Dr. Trophagen and other anti-Meti researchers, we return to the planet Ibos and its inhabitants, the Parm Dooms. The majority of the Parm Doom population is devoutly hapstanatic, all followers of a religion based on focusing inwards and fostering a connection to the collective consciousness of Ibosian life itself. To them, Ibos is the originator of life, the mother to all consciousness, and by definition, a singularity. Children are taught that genesis and purity come from within, and destruction and corruption come from without. With this as a root cultural understanding shared by nearly all the planet's subcultures, much of the populace does not take well to the Gibbon astronomer's announcement of first contact. Many of the most devout, naturally, don't believe it flat out, and many who do believe it do so with fear, assuming beings from the outside must be demonic. The Rektar of Havtag Nin, a powerful religious and political leader whom a little over a quarter of the Parm Dooms follow, makes the mistake of declaring the Gibbon astronomers as being heretics. The local believers form a mob and quickly storm the observatory, something they had long wanted to do anyway. Some of the astronomers manage to flee, but several others are killed in the fray. The crime greatly angers the contingent of more secular Parm Dooms, a group which had been growing throughout the age of science, and quickly there is rioting outside religious centers across the planet. The levels of violence vary based on the location and the temperament of the population, but globally, thousands are killed in what amounts to the largest violent conflict in the history of an otherwise fairly homogeneous and peaceful planet.
The Parm Dooms' worldviews could not keep up with their new scientific understandings, and because of this, decades of built-up tension came flooding out with the trigger of first contact to rile the crowds. After a number of days, however, the shock of the scale at which the violence grew to starts to hit home for much of the populace, and things begin to die down as more turn their attention to the unpleasant task of cleaning up the bodies, something most have never done. And thus, the concerns of Dr. Traphagen and the anti-Medi camp. It's arguable that this calamity was our fault for so flagrantly broadcasting our presence into the unpredictable environment of another culture's affairs. When taking in this example, it's easy to see their point. Although, in real life, stories don't really have firm endings, and so similarly, our tale on Ibos continues. It's now been 45 Ibosian years since first contact, and while no further communications from space have been detected in that time, the Parm Dooms' interest is growing in the knowledge that something is out there, waiting to hear from them. The last remaining astronomer from the first contact days, a Parm Doom named Gaijo Kek, arrives at the Yamtov Ulio Media Array, a central hub for planet-wide news and entertainment broadcasting. Upon arrival, she is greeted by Danvor Iran, owner of the array, and the newly throned Rektar of Havtag Nin, who bows low on 2 of 3 knees, a traditional motion of respect born from regret. Today is an important day for all of Ibos, as at last the political will has met the technological prowess necessary to transmit a response in the general direction of the first contact signal. The VIPs make their way upstairs to the broadcast center and gather around a lone computer terminal in the middle of the room. Ready to transmit is a message similar to the one received, a DNA sequence from Ibos, encoded first with the same encoding scheme as the received message, and second with an encoding scheme based on Parm Doom language. It's up to Gaijo Kek to do the honors. When the time comes, she taps a single key on the terminal, and the array, silently, begins singing to the stars. The first interstellar exchange is now underway, and there isn't a thing on Ibos, or on Earth, that can stop it. What happens from here is anyone's guess. Certainly, it will be a story featuring a wide array of good and bad consequences as time marches forward. How the bad and the good balance out, though, or whether they do at all, is anyone's guess. This whole story is merely one speculation out of infinity. Things could go better, or they could go worse than I imagined for you here. I'm not the best sci-fi writer out there. It's impossible to truly predict the risks. But that's the way life always has been. History is a never-ending story, full of unpredictable events with different kinds of outcomes for different groups of people. Sometimes in this technological age, it's easy to feel like we're a mature species with control over what we do and the kinds of situations we'd allow ourselves to end up in. It's easy for some to say we should or shouldn't do something because of the dangers that it might arouse, and often those people have a point. But the thing is, we're not in control of fate. We never have been, and we never will be. Nothing stops fate. Humans have and will continue to broadcast messages for as long as we have the ability to do so. If there's somebody out there listening, then they're eventually going to hear from us. And if they're feeling talkative, then we are eventually going to hear from them. I'm Keegan Van Hook. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Nowhere to be found.
It sends and receives radio signals.
Nowhere to be
But
found.
it's so large and powerful that it could communicate with an identical radio telescope 15,000 light years away, halfway to the center.
Nowhere.
short